This is a virtual reading of Conspirators, To Each His Own Agenda by Mag Gupta.
Chapter 29. The Victory Road. The coast was a buzz of motion. Julius had brought a plan into motion, and it required everyone to play their part. The entire coast road from Pharas to Cliff had been set up with wooden stakes, ditches, and basic barricades. Word had spread the length of the coast that an invasion was imminent, and civilians from all over were coming to help. Men and women from Cliff, the harbour, and even the giant Scotsmen of mountain villages of Securi came to help the preparation for the defence. None of them were soldiers, but Julius was hardly going to turn them away. There was a rare glimmer of hope when 500 mercenaries arrived from the Goths to offer aid. But they demanded their payment up front, and when Julius was found both unable and unwilling to agree to it, their enthusiasm vanished along with their arms. Tathar was quick to reassure the prince that he'd made the right decision in sending them away. He didn't like mercenaries and prattled on for nearly an hour as the reasons why. The main problem was that Julius did not know where the pirates would attack specifically. Seaward would be safe from attack, as it had a strong garrison and high walls. But the rest of the coastal realm was undefended, and it was a lot of territory, stretching from the borders of Adrianople to the villages on the heel of the kingdom's boot at Stiletto. Tathar had had the idea of deploying the army in the centre of the coast, to be as close as they could be to Sicilia, and thus be a tempting piece of bait. Julius had taken to this and marched his 1,500 men to take camp in the middle of the coastal road, near to where the pirates had ambushed Felthor, their backs to the mountains and aqueducts that barred seaward from a land invasion. His battle plan was strange in comparison to more common tactics, many of which had relied on discipline and close-range combat. In truth, this was where the kingdom's strength came from. Very rarely had it called upon misdirection and terror tactics. Tathar had voiced such concern when he heard the plan, claiming it to be dishonourable and cowardly, but it had only taken Julius to challenge him to come up with something better to make him agree to the plan. Gilorn was sitting on a small tree stump, flicking a coin between his fingers. Julius had paid him and Yorlim for their scouting mission, and had warned them to return to Islesfield, but he and Yorlim had refused and were now fighting alongside them. When Gilorn broke this news to Alfil, she merely laughed and nodded, but she refused to leave Pharas and wait in Seaward, even when Julius had welcomed her to stay in the prince's palace. Her knowledge on herb law proved to be invaluable to his garrison medical officer, and he had immediately taken her on as his apprentice. She was making poultices for the wounded when they would arrive, and had taken great pride in learning the value of cleaning instruments in boiling water, something that was a revelation to her in her Dacian ways. Gilorn's brake was up, and he leapt back down into the ditch to fit in a long wooden spike. Yorlim came over to him, his hands covered in pitch. "I hate this," he complained. "I stink." "No more than usual." Gilorn shrugged as he watched the people who Iolim had left putting up a barricade wall. It was positioned to fill the gap between the formations so that they could funnel the enemy lines. The wooden stakes would impale them, and it would take time to break them down. He sighed to himself. With himself and Yorlim, the archer ranks were barely over 200 men. The strength of the kingdom was in its ability to get up close to the enemy, and archers were not in high demand. It was a blow to the army, as archers on a high position could destroy a large part of the enemy bearing down on them. There was no point in wishing, however, so he went back to work and left Yorlim to his grumbling. Julius was in his tent with the swan and Tathar, the white glass necklace donned around his neck. They were discussing the finer plans of the battle. The swan was in his armor, as was Tathar. It looked strange on him, as the armor had to be remade to allow for his swollen belly, and the brand new steel was already stained red with wine. Nonetheless, he was standing taller in his armor, and, more importantly, he was able to stand straight. It was odd. He hadn't touched a bottle since they had left the castle. The men were arguing about how wide each company of men should be. The swan wanted to spread the lines thinly and have the formations 2 men wider than the gaps in the stakes to allow for reinforcements to replenish any diminished ranks. Tathar wanted them the same length as the gaps, as the men at the sides would be wasted, and they needed every man to fight. Though Julius respected the swan's opinion over Tathar, he sided with Tathar in this. The next part was even more of a headache. The swan was concerned about having the men too close to the fire, not for fear of burning, but the men in their heavy metal armor would feel the heat of the flames more than the pirates. Tathar didn't care about that. The men needed to be on the brink of the gap in order to hold it. Otherwise, the plan would lose its point. Julius agreed with the swan on this, as the plan was in the fire, and if the pirates crossed the fire ditches, then they would be able to break the armies up. So they agreed that the fire would only be used to split the army up and not to be used in a close-quarter capacity. "And what happens if the pitch doesn't light?" Tathar asked, after the point had been settled. "Then we die," Julius said. "Everything relies on it. The Kingslayer and his friend will command the lighting of the pitch." "Dacian militia?" Tathar sneered. "Men not worth the spit on my boots, assuming they have boots." "How will we lure them here?" the swan asked. "Out of the entire coast, this center part is the most defended. Surely it would be better for them to land elsewhere and take us from the side. Ignatius's plan is for this force to destroy us, so they will come to us. My father has sent us a gift from General Felthor. I'm making it our standard. The pirates won't be able to avoid attacking us. Their honor will depend on it." "What gift?" Tathar scoffed. Julius smiled and looked up at the standard by his head. It was a black sail of the fleet master's ship, and the braid that had been cut from him on a long oak shaft. The blue and silver owl of Seaward was on top of it. The swan nodded, impressed. "We'll erect it as high as we can, so the scouts will see it, and then they'll attack." "Right," the swan nodded. He donned his helmet. "I'll ride out and scout the countryside, see if they'll try to launch a sneak attack." "Good," Julius nodded. "Just recon their position. Engage them only if you can defeat them. We cannot afford any losses." "Yes, my prince," the swan nodded. He saluted and left. "Let's just hope we're ready for when he comes back," Julius said, toying with the necklace around his neck. The swan returned before the day was done. No sign of the enemy. The generals oversaw the rest of the fortifications, and soon the preparations were as complete as they could be. It was a remarkable feat of military engineering. They had to thank Tathar for that. Now all they could do was wait. The night came and went, but Julius had no sleep. He could hear the calling of the waves, and it was surprisingly loud. He finally went to sleep in his boiled leather, and it was very uncomfortable for him. The dawn came, and Julius arose. He couldn't help but think this was his last day on Earth, so he ate before his ride. He knew he would regret it, but he was already sick to his stomach anyway. He donned his armor after he ate and found his horse. His timing couldn't be better. The watchtower network Tathar had created sounded the alarm. The bells were ringing low and loud, reverberating off the water and echoing from helmet to helmet of every soldier in the camp. The Swan appeared in the tent. There was no need for him to say anything. "Prepare the men for battle," Julius nodded. The pirate ships were clearly visible on the water, their pure black hulls and sails moving like huge shadows against the sunlight. Julius's lines were drawn, every man and horse. The army was ready inside of 20 minutes, the men all knowing what they were there to do, and there was no confusion. When everyone was ready, they waited. The pirates simply sailed on, floating along the water, but as they moved closer, the lead ship began to slow. "What are they waiting for?" Julius cursed. "They're probing us," Tathar explained coolly. He was eating a small piece of boiled meat, wondering if we're worth the time to shit before they kill us all. "Well, if they're watching us," Julius said, "let us show them what we have to say." Tathar smiled, tossed the meat away, and shouted to his men. They raised the standard and watched it flap away in the wind. After a long moment, there was a shout from the ships and a series of horn blasts. "We'll be fighting here, it seems." Tathar smiled again. "Sir?" Halfhead interrupted, inclining his head to one side slightly. "They're flying a flag of truce." "For a man with only one eye, you have damn good sight," Julius smiled, craning his eyes to try and confirm. "Send the Swan out to the flanks. Shield wall the local area. Keep our archers safe. Everything depends on them. Let's go." Tathar nodded to his citadel guardsman. The bastard picked out the standard from the ground and carried it on his horse. They rode down the trenches and onto the beach. 4 arrows flew at them and landed in front of them, stopping them just short of their archer range, or what they hoped was outside their range. "This is the kingdom," Julius shouted. "Who are you to bring an invasion fleet down upon us?" A slender man stepped forward and climbed up onto the rigging on his mast, hanging off it by one hand with deft agility. To be a fleet master of a fleet this size, he must have huge renown, and he showed it. His braid was crossed around his chest and wrapped around his waist. On both sides of the crosses were knives, over 20 of them, so that his naked chest glittered as much as Julius's soldiers in their armor. "We are Gladium," the man bellowed in the common tongue, his accent making it hard to understand. "We are Bajag's chosen. We will take your lands, fuck your women, and your riches will be ours. How dare you bar our passage with the braid of my brother? I am Julius, son of Alistair, the heir to Seaward. This is the land of my grandfather, and we will defend it against you." The pirates all laughed. Many of them pulled down their breeches and urinated into the river. Others imitated cutting off a penis, using long fruit or pieces of wood. "Look around, boy," the fleet master shouted. "My entire fleet is bearing down on you. I know the strength of your force. I have legions of men. What do you have?" "This," Julius thought, fingering the necklace. "Do you want me to look upon your fleet and tremble?" he shouted. "I see them. I see 10,000 men brought here for evil reasons. I have men behind me, and I have the braid of dead pirate scum. Come get it back." And with that, he turned his horse and rode away. Tathar and his guards rode after him. Finally, they took up their positions. "Here we go," he said, with a long sigh. "I really need a drink," Tathar grumbled. Julius laughed. Tathar turned to the men, who were looking out at where the pirates were starting to land their ships. "Right, you bastards," he shouted to their backs. The soldiers turned their heads to look at him. "You will lock your shields, raise your swords, fight until your blood runs dry. Do that, and we will taste victory. If you find yourself in the fields of the afterlife, you will be ashamed, because when we win this battle, The drinks are on me." Julius laughed, but the men exploded in cheers, banging their shields with their swords and rattling their spears. "Shield wall," Tathar shouted, and, like the waves that brought their enemies upon them, the men threw their shields over their heads and locked them into position. "Swords up!" The men did so. They were a soldier wall of shields, wooden stakes and steel blades. "These men want to rape our wives and sweethearts, so let's fuck them in their arses in return when they retreat." "Archers," Julius shouted, "ready yourselves." "Hear that, lads?" Yorlim shouted. "Knock, draw, aim, fire, in that order." "Release only on our orders," Gilorn commanded. "What happens if we disagree?" Yorlim asked, glancing at Gilorn out of the corner of his eye. "Let's not disagree," Gilorn smiled. "I have a child to get home to." The ships were landing. It was a well-practiced maneuver. The ships were moving into a single-line formation. Each one turned and rowed parallel to the coast. The men on the ships leapt off, each splashing into the water and wading over to the beach. It was low tide, and the warriors didn't have far to swim. They formed up on the beach into their war bands, much like the companies of soldiers in Julius's forces. One ship disembarked, then another, and then another. They worked like a machine, spawning company after company of warriors. Within an hour, all 40 ships had disembarked their force. "If we hadn't sent our horsemen away, I would have charged them," Julius lamented. "Do not lament your choice," Tathar said. "When our commander starts to doubt himself, then all is lost on principle." Julius looked at him. "Well, allow me this one regret. I should have put you in command when you first arrived." "Yes, you should have," Tathar grunted, licking his teeth. "If we had charged them, we would be in range of their archers and ballista. We would lose our vanguard for the sake of a beach, and our demise would simply be longer." "How did they have so many men on a single ship?" "The voyage wasn't long," Tathar said. "They can be cramped for the sake of an hour or two. It also makes them more aggressive when they finally disembark." "At least that will make the battle happen sooner," Julius said. "Let's hope the Swan is in position." "Let us hope." The pirates began to move forward in untidy formations of warriors. They crossed the beach and began to march out onto the grassland. Before long, they passed the road. "Archers," Julius called. "Knock, you bastards," Yorlim shouted. "Draw, aim." The front-line companies had now cleared the dirt road. "Now," Tathar whispered. "Fire," Julius shouted. "Fire," Gilorn shouted, and 200 arrows flew through the air. The dirt road was their mark. The rear end of the front line was hit, and the front of the company behind them also. Hardly an arrow was wasted, but it was only 200. The pirates had a concept of shield walls and raised their shields to block the next wave of arrows. The shields took the next impact. "Shit," Tathar shook his head. "Keep firing. It will batter their confidence." Arrow after arrow was shot. A few of them hit their marks, and a few pirates fell, but most of the arrows were embedded in shields. "We need to stop wasting arrows." "No," Tathar shook his head. "The constant barrage of arrows will dampen their morale, and that is the only weapon we have. We have enough arrows for a siege, so stop worrying." "Easy for you to say," Julius said. His heart was thundering against his chest. The front line of troops was nearing the ditch where the pitch was. "Let them pass," he thought to himself. "How many lines must pass until we light the fires?" "It must be half," Tathar said. "We'll be outnumbered 5-1. Any more will be too much for the horsemen." The pirates had broken into a full sprint now, their impulse getting the better of them. As the shield wall broke, the arrows had more of an impact. The army was closing the gap inch by inch. They crossed the pitch line, and Julius let out a sigh of relief. He urged them under his breath to come closer, taunting them inaudibly. "Now," Tathar called, making him jump. "Light the fires." "Kingslayer," Julius yelled. Gilon was in the middle of firing an arrow when Julius called him. He and Eorlim abandoned their shooting and grabbed a fire arrow each. There was a brazier set before them, and they ignited. They fired without invitation. The two arrows whistled through the air in different directions, leaving smoke trails in their wake. They thudded into the pitch hay and burned for a moment. The pirates nearest them let out a cry out dismay, but then suddenly the pitch ignited. The line was thin, but the timing was brilliant. An entire row of men was caught in the fire, and nearly 500 men were set ablaze. Their screams and cries were music to Julius's ears. The men ahead of the fire turned and watched in horror as the fire spread in a long arch, seemingly all the way to the horizon. The other half of the army wouldn't be able to join them for a long time. The pirates stood helpless, watching their comrades burn. Many of the burning men tried to reach for the comrades for help, but were simply put to the sword themselves. "Now comes the hard part," Tathar smiled. "On my signal, send in the reserves." He nodded to Halfhead, who was on foot and standing near them. "Forward," Halfhead shouted, his voice ripping through the air, and the first of the two company rows advanced towards the panicking pirates to stand in between the barricades. When they heard the men approaching, the pirates returned to their formations. They charged to meet them, their rage fueled by the fire. As one, the men sheathed their swords and pulled out one of the two pilum throwing spears they held in their shields. In one terrible wave of black wood and metal, the front lines of the pirates was decimated. As the Romans drew their swords again, the pirates smashed into them. Their lines distorted by the stakes, they clamoured around them, attempting to shove the wooden impalers aside and break through to the men on the other side. But the stakes were long and dug deep. Blood sprayed out as men on the edge of the formation lost their balance and fell onto the massive spikes, where others cried out in agony as their feet were impaled on smaller blades. The kingdom cohorts held their ground, a full shell of shields. The more agile pirates leapt over their shields, and men were slain on both sides of the defense. The battlefield was lost in a sea of red flames and black smoke. Just as Julius was about to curse their bad luck, the wind started to blow in an odd fashion, keeping the smoke floating above where the pirates stood and leaving the Roman forces in the clean air. "Thank you, my lady," Julius muttered in prayer, bringing the necklace to his lips. The fields were alive with cries. The pirates were suffocating in the smoke, and their formations were becoming broken. Julius felt so helpless, standing at the head of his army with nothing to do except wait. His horse was getting agitated, and he, himself, was getting restless. Tathar suddenly caught his attention. "Signal the cavalry," he shouted. "Signal the cavalry." Julius grabbed his horn and blew 3 long blasts. He would not know if the swan had received the signal until he arrived, and he was a long way away. The advantage they had was their knights. The pirates had no cavalry, even on their own land. The battle went on and the shield wall stood firm, but many of the pirates who were not in the fight had taken to trying to sabotage the stakes in the ground, either by cutting them or trying to uproot them. The men who had fallen on the spikes had been slammed down onto them. The pirates weren't hesitant to kill their own. In one place, they had broken through, but Tathar, his attention facing forwards, hadn't noticed. Julius spurred his horse over to Gilon. "Archers, target the breach." The archers did so, abandoning their targets at the flames and targeting the pirates to their left. The effect was devastating. Every arrow found some mark, but it was Gilorn who had impressed. He had killed 2 with a single arrow. "Kingslayer," Julius shouted. "Take command here." "Men," he shouted to one of the 3 cohorts of reserves. "Move up." It meant that the archers could not fight them, but the time it took for the archers to reload and fire again allowed the pirates to advance. They had to be met.